Okay. And I think most of you all know who Evan and I are, but I'm the Associate Director of Neighborhood International Center for Senior Services. And Evan?
I am the Legislative Director for Aging Policy.
Which means we just do a lot together, right?
A little bit.
How to be your own best advocate. And picture the United States Capitol, which we never visit. When we go on when we used to go actually up on the hill to do visits, every once in a while we'd cross in the back of the Capitol, but we meet in generic office buildings. Senate's a little nicer than the House buildings, right? Okay, so we're gonna start out. What is advocacy? And advocacy is the act of making an argument in support of a cause, idea, or policy. One can engage in advocacy by meeting with a lawmaker on an important issue, writing an editorial for a newspaper, raising awareness for a cause at a community event, or even promoting an issue while having dinner with friends. Advocacy occurs when an individual engages in dialogue about an issue they care about. It can occur in many forms: speaking out, letter writing, protesting, voting, and even wearing a t-shirt that makes a statement. And when we're talking about advocacy here, we are talking about, I think this presentation is going to be more geared towards the residents as the advocates, because I mean, they are a larger collective voice. But this training, I mean, this applies for anybody that is a constituent, whether we're talking, and we're going to touch on federal, state, and local officials. Anyone who is a constituent as well. And something to always keep in mind too, when you're advocating, especially on the federal level, remember, you want your state and local officials to know who you are as well, because they're constituents of some of the federal officials as well. So they're all interconnected in some ways. So just wanted to make sure you keep that in mind too.
Sure. The reason to advocate is that policy impacts the residents of your buildings. And the residents of your building can be their own best advocate. Advocacy can be very empowering for everyone, but in particular seniors. The policy that a person can advocate about can be on the local, state, and federal government levels. At B'nai B'rith, most of our advocacy efforts are on the federal level because our sponsor building service coordinators and rental subsidies are funded through the federal budget. HUD-assisted senior housing is certainly our #1 advocacy goal. However, there are important advocacy goals that can be accomplished on the state and local level. For example, on the state level with Medicaid and nutrition programs. Oh, we're good. Next page, sorry. I'll say that from now on.
Okay.
Another important reason to advocate is because it's critical to have a relationship with your elected officials. As Janelle and I talked about earlier, when you start to have a relationship with your elected officials, they send you emails a lot. I know an elected official's office just contacted me, and I certainly spoke with Janelle in the building and questioned about it, saying that they might be able to get some personal protective equipment in the form of masks for the building. They thought of us based on the relationship that we have with the office. So during a time of crisis, having that contact will certainly be very, very helpful, and can certainly help you cut through the red tape. They have caseworkers in their office whose job it is to assist with constituent casework. We will certainly talk more about this as it relates to the pandemic a little later in the PowerPoint.
Right, and like early on in the COVID-19 response, I know that we were able to connect one of our building staff with the local Department of Health and the State Department of Health through our federal congressional contacts too. So you just never know.
Yep.
Okay. So who's going to be your audience? So on the federal level, it's your elected members of Congress. Each state has 2 members in the Senate, and each congressional district has 1 member in the House of Representatives. On the state level, your elected members are your state legislature, whatever you call it. Sometimes it's a 2 levels. Is it usually a 2-level system? That's what I'm used to.
It is.
Like Senate.
Not every state, but
There's-
most states.
Yeah, there's just different names for it. And then on the local, it can be council members. You usually have a mayor or county executive. So usually you have a couple of levels on the local as well. Okay, and why are your elected officials your audience? So they make the policies that affect you and your residents, and this again is on the local, state, and federal level. Evan, you want to talk about the examples?
Each state has programs that are distinct that impact seniors. For example, states have their own unique programs that help older Americans in the areas of healthcare and nutrition. Oftentimes, programs that benefit seniors can be administered on the federal and state level. Medicaid is a great example of this program. Certain components of the program are funded through state government budgets. Depending on the component of the program, this then leads you to how the particular subset of the program is funded. Next. Before you decide to advocate to an elected official, it's important to know where to find their office. For example, your elected officials in Washington, D.C. have offices on the Capitol and in your hometown or state. For people that don't live in Washington, D.C. and want to advocate on the federal level, setting up a meeting with your congressional representative pre-COVID-19 in your home state is easy to do. And we'll certainly talk about the mechanics of this later on in the presentation.
And on the federal level, those offices, especially the Senate offices, I mean, they're usually in bigger cities. Most of you all are in bigger cities, so you most likely will have an office nearby.
Yep. And the same principle applies for state and local officials as well, who should have offices in your neighborhood. When I worked for a New York City councilman, I worked in the district office, and it was smack in the middle of a business area. So it's very, very accessible. Bus stops, train stops, very, very easy to get to. Next slide.
Okay, and last but not least, who would be the best advocate? Kind of said some of this stuff already, but the constituents of those elected officials, the residents, the staff, board members, and volunteers. Remember, this is a great thing to go over with your board members. If hopefully they're at least on the Senate level, federally constituents, but if not, they're also in the district, which is pretty powerful that they're volunteering there as well. And your volunteers. Don't forget your volunteers can be a great advocate, especially the ones that are doing wellness programs with your residents. Include them, and the family members and friends of the residents, especially family members that live in the state. You know, they as well are constituents and can really bring a voice to the programs that help and affect your residents. So we as constituents have a right to voice our opinions on issues that affect us. Empowering residents to make sure their elected officials know how their policies affect them is how our government works.
Before the pandemic, there were various ways to advocate, whether it was writing a letter, calling your member, inviting your elected representative to the building, or having a face-to-face meeting with a staffer. All these methods are great. However, we're going to discuss how to do them all effectively and under what circumstances each method might be the most appropriate. Obviously, the pandemic has certainly shifted the way we do our advocacy efforts. Janel and I can certainly speak to that. We don't, as we talked about, we don't go up to Capitol Hill anymore, and we certainly do all of our advocacy efforts over the phone. Virtual has become the new norm. Next.
And I just want to mention again, or maybe I forgot to mention, if you want to ask any questions, use the chat. Gracie is monitoring those. So please feel free to ask any questions. Hopefully we can get you an answer today. Okay, so writing a letter to Congress. Correspondence can be one of the most effective tools to advocate to your representative and allows you to explain how existing proposed legislation personally impacts your life or the life of your residents, and allows the message to come from you, from the resident, who is really the best advocate. And you can state how you directly benefit from affordable housing. Again, you can use these slides. We're gonna eventually have this presentation posted online, and you can use these slides to create your own program to inform the residents of how to do an advocacy program and how to advocate for themselves.
Sure. A great letter is one where the author can make the reader believe that they are talking to them directly. Most importantly, a letter is a personal message. For example, tell your elected representative how you benefit from HUD-assisted affordable housing. This paints a personal story about the writer. Don't get into the weeds of the legislation in question. Just worry about the end result. Congressional offices receive thousands of letters a week, so it's important that letters are limited to only 1 or 2 pages. You don't want the person reading the letter thinking it's going to take them a half hour to read the correspondence. Also, it's good practice to thank the member of Congress in the beginning and end of the letter. You should be able to answer the question through a little bit of a narrative of the writer's life. What happens if I lose my rental subsidy? Assuming that you're writing a letter about HUD-assisted senior affordable housing. Next. As you can see, this letter is incredibly short, probably a little too short. It doesn't identify who the writer is, where do they live, or any other biographical information. In addition, it's unclear what problem the writer is advocating about. It doesn't say in the body of the letter, Section 202 or HUD-assisted senior housing. I would have settled for either one there. Plus, it doesn't describe how the writer personally benefits from HUD affordable housing. That's key. Every letter needs to express how the person who is writing the letter benefits from HUD affordable senior housing. Next.
Plus, I think you would even want to, in a letter like this, write out, instead of saying, you know, I voted for you 3 times and I think you are wonderful, please don't cut HUD's budget, that you would actually write out U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as well.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Perfect. So as we can see, this is a very different letter than the previous. Still fits on 1 page, which is good. Notice how this letter is, still 1 page, but as we said, certainly more in depth than the previous correspondence. The first thing that a writer should do in any letter is introduce themselves and make the office aware that they are a constituent. This letter accomplishes this in 2 ways. In the first paragraph, they say the city and state where they are from, and at the top of the letter, it indicates the writer's exact address. It's important that the reader knows you are a constituent. Also, this paragraph can be used as an opportunity to show how long that the writer has lived in the building and some history about the writer's life. The second paragraph directly states the reason for writing the letter. In this case, the White House is proposing to cut the budget for HUD. And the third paragraph talks about how the writer benefits from living in HUD-assisted senior housing. It cites examples, in particular the service coordinator, and how that benefits their day-to-day activities. The fourth paragraph concludes the letter. Obviously, we want to thank the member of Congress, again, for reading the letter. Every spring, B'nai B'rith asks the staff members and service coordinators who work in our sponsored building to help their residents write letters to their members of Congress asking for full funding for HUD-assisted senior housing. We coordinate this activity in the spring because that's when the budget in Congress starts to get written. Next.
And I think Evan made a really good point, though, saying, you want to thank them. And in any kind of interaction, you always want to thank the congressperson, even if you don't agree with them politically or what they're doing. It has to be a positive and interaction. And I think that's really key. And we're going to stress that in some of the other ways you would interact with either your congressperson or their staff.
Yep.
So calling your member's office, that's a good segue. Always make it positive, even if you're talking about a negative. Calling your representative's office is a great and quick way to express your opinion. And as we know during COVID-19, probably the best way to do it. Can be easier to organize a phone calling operation than a letter writing campaign. And that goes very true with your residents, especially during COVID-19. Just getting them a script, getting them the phone call, the phone information, the call-in number and everything. It just takes 5 minutes out of their day, as opposed to letter writing can be a little intimidating for people. So there's all sorts of ways that I think a phone call is probably the most effective way, especially at this time. And allows your member to immediately know your position on an issue as opposed to the mail. And it's great for some time-sensitive issues. And I will say, going way back, when Evan and I used to go up to congressional offices and actually physically visit those offices and the staffers, when the Affordable Care Act was coming up to being, they were going to vote in Congress on repealing it, we would go into offices, and that's, you could tell because you sit in the waiting room, and that's where the people that answer the phone and talk to the constituents and get their concerns, that's all they were dealing with. It was nonstop. As soon as they got off one call, they were on another one, and there could be like a few people in that main waiting room sitting on those phone calls, answering the phones, and that's all we heard. And we know what happened. It was not repealed. So those phone calls on a time-sensitive issue do make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, next one.
The basic principles of making an effective phone call are similar to writing a good letter. The call should only last 2 minutes. Members of Congress, as Janel just talked about, get thousands of calls from constituents a day, especially about hot topic issues. The staff member speaking to you is eager to hear what you have to say and log the call. However, given the number of calls congressional offices receive, they are unable to talk on the phone for 20 minutes. Given the time constraints of a congressional office, it might not be a bad idea to write a script ahead of time of what you want to say. We'll show you a model script in a second. Read the script out loud before the call. This way you can make sure what you're saying is concise and to the point. Lastly, as the case with a letter, it's always smart, no matter what, no matter the elected official or issue, to say thank you in the beginning and end of the call. Like writing a letter. Oh, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say before you went to the next slide that one of the things we learned, especially with the Affordable Care Act, now I don't know if this is going to happen with 202 funding, but it certainly could be if there was something coming up with Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, that a lot of the offices, when you would make a phone call, you would have to put in your zip code. So like even as person putting this advocacy program together, you know, you're going to have all the residents call about this issue, making sure you actually do a phone call and know whether they need to do this stuff. Because sometimes if people aren't prepared, especially when you have to start putting in numbers and then a pound or whatever and listen to directions before you even get to a live person, can really throw some people. So I would definitely do a phone call beforehand to make sure if you need that information, everybody knows exactly what is going to transpire in that phone call.
Like when we do our letters at B'nai B'rith, we encourage the residents of our housing network every spring to call their members of Congress to advocate for the maximum amount of funding for HUD-assisted senior housing and service coordinators. Next page. All right, a sample script. So we're looking at a sample script right now, which is very similar in content to a letter. The person identifies themselves as a resident in the district or state, states that they rely on HUD Section 202 affordable housing and for a service coordinator. Obviously, if your building doesn't have a service coordinator, we can adapt a script accordingly. And notice that similar to a letter, the script fits on one page, therefore it'll only take a minute or two. What generally offices do for letters and phone calls is at the end of the day, they'll tally up the issue, pros and cons, and give that to like the chief of staff or give that to the member themselves. So obviously, the more people who write a letter and the more people who make a call, the better. But because unfortunately, given the amount of volume of calls and letters they get, it really a phone call doesn't need to be 10 minutes. It does not need to be 10 minutes in length. It can be done in 1 or 2 minutes and certainly get the point across. All right, next page.
Okay, so I know we have already talked about this on some of our calls, and actually I think on one we did show you this page, CSS advocacy page. Again, it's www.b'nai CSS/advocacy. You can go on the main B'nai B'rith page, click on seniors, where you see underneath B'nai B'rith International, you'll see About Us, Global Advocacy, Israel Seniors. You go to seniors and hover with your mouse or whatever, if you're on an iPad, you can, there's CSS advocacy and just click on that. And so it's going to take you to this web page. And we have tools on there too. So it's a guide, how to be an effective advocate, a guide to taking charge. There's a sample letter, sample script for calling your legislator, information on meeting with them, and how to find your legislator. Now that would be on the federal level, but a lot of this can be adjusted on the state and local level. And again, you can download a sample letter. We even have the letter just talks about living in a Section 202 building. You could also do this for 236 if that's what you have. And then we have a sample letter that talks about the services the service coordinator provides. And that usually you would do that. And that's when Evan sends out information, always in March when the new budget comes out, proposed federal budget, of the services the service coordinator provides, because some of that is tied to the federal budget funding. Again, the phone call. And then there is a page, you can see where that orange arrow is at, and it shows how to find your congressional representative in the House. And that's it's a little easier to do the, what is it, the Senate one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that one, I believe for the House, you actually have to put in your zip code.
correct. In the Senate, all you have to do is go to the Senate's website, and they have a list of every senator, and then it tells you what state it's from. So it's okay. a little bit simpler.
Right, and you can get those right from our website. Click on those, and it'll take you right there, and that'll show you where also their district offices are that you can visit when things are different, when we're not dealing with COVID-19. Okay, so also on there are 2 videos. Now, the one problem with Zoom we have found is even if we have the actual video file, they just don't show too well on a Zoom for whatever reason, like they would when you go to the website. So you can go, you'll see one, it's starring Gracie, Evan, and myself, doing what a typical congressional visit would be like. And normally when Evan and I go, and probably if you all ever go to your district office, you're more likely to meet with a staffer of the congressperson or, of the congressperson that that deals probably with housing or some of the issues you're there to discuss. And this is a good person to get to know because they do have the ear of the congressperson. You're not just getting pushed on to some lower level staffer. This person, they know the issues more than the congressperson does. And they can be the ones, they'll go to the congressperson and talk to them when it's appropriate about some of your issues. So never feel that you're getting pushed off if you meet with a district staffer, or if you come to DC and you meet with a staffer that specializes in housing, because you are meeting with the appropriate person. The next one is, for those that know Mark Olshan, it stars Gracie and Mark Olshan, and it's a typical phone call. And I think that one's really, really short. It did follow the guidelines and Evan's script that he put together, so it's only a couple of minutes long to watch. The other one's a little longer. I think it's like 7 minutes or something, but it still can give you an idea of what it is like and be prepared. So anyhow, we are going to show you, there would be Mark Olshan and Gracie Cohen with the YouTube. We're going to have Gracie and Evan do that quick phone call, so you can hear what it's like and how easy it is to do.
Sounds good. All right, Gracie, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, ring, 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 ring.
Congresswoman Cohen's office.
Hello, my name is Evan Carmen and I am 85 years old. I live at B'nai B'rith Towers, a HUD Section 202 building funded in your district. I rely on HUD Section 202 funding to help me with my housing expenses and to pay for a service coordinator to help me get the services I need to stay in my home. Our service coordinator's name is Janel. She helps me with my daily activities. She makes sure that I don't have to move somewhere else like a nursing home. The budget is being written for next year, and I don't want to have her job terminated. If I do not have someone here in the building to help me, I may not be able to stay here. Please tell Representative Cohen to protect funding for the HUD Service Coordinator and HUD Section 202 housing program. Cutting funds for the programs that we need is wrong. We live on a fixed income and have worked all of our lives. We need a safe place to live.
Well, thank you, Evan. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you so much for taking my call.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for your concern, and I will certainly pass along your concerns.
Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, great. So, I mean, it is really easy, and it lasted, I didn't time that, but it was pretty quick. But, any one of us can do that, and following the script makes it so easy. Anything you want to add, Evan, since you were the caller?
No. It's certainly again. It takes only about a minute or two to do. We hit on the points that how you personally benefit from HUD assisted senior housing. We touch on the fact that you are in fact a constituent of the office that you're calling up, and we have expressly stated how you benefit from HUD assisted senior housing and what would happen if your place no longer existed.
Yeah, great. Well, and thank you, Evan, because also Evan's the one that's put together these scripts. So we really appreciate his expertise in together for us. And if you ever do have, even if it's at a state or local level, you want some help adapting that script, always let Evan know. He can help out.
Sure, of course. Everybody should have my contact information.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the best ways, and I think I would probably argue, and I think that Janelle would agree, before the pandemic to advocate is to invite your representative to the property. While that's not a viable option right now, hopefully someday that will certainly come back. So let's dive right into that. Next slide.
Oh, and I just wanted to mention that's Goldberg Towers, right? Goldberg B'nai B'rith Towers in Houston, Texas. And we did hear from Phyllis Davis about the buildings in Houston and Pasadena that they're doing fine. I guess they didn't feel the brunt of the hurricane. So we're really happy for them.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I was going to ask.
Yeah, that just reminded me. Okay.
Inviting your member to your building allows them to see exactly what your building's all about, the people it provides housing for, and the services it offers, including a service coordinator, and brings an elected official to the doorstep of where your residents live and your residents may have no other contact with their member of Congress or their elected representative on the state and local level. This will give an opportunity for your residents to ask questions to their elected officials and hear from them about the issues which impact their day-to-day lives. An elected official hearing directly from the residents about their personal stories leaves a powerful, lasting impression with the representative and their staff. We hope that this impression stays with them when they are writing legislation and voting on issues that impact the day-to-day lives of the residents of your buildings. Getting a chance to see all of the amenities in the buildings, getting a chance to see a sample apartment unit, getting a chance just to have a conversation with somebody who lives in there. Well, I certainly think that Janel and I do a great job advocating for the buildings, talking about all the great things that are going on in the buildings. The people who live in the buildings, the voters, really are the best possible advocacy really comes from that. Next slide. So how do you arrange an on-site visit? It can sound like a daunting task, but it's actually a little bit easier than you think. You have to be patient, but your member of Congress most likely is pretty eager to visit your building. If you keep in mind a few basic principles, it can be an easy thing to set up. First, you should call the office and ask for the scheduler's contact information. Usually the best contact information is going to be an email address. Have several proposed dates over the course of 6 months to be discussed with the office. Keep in mind you have a better chance to get the representative to visit if you ask for dates when Congress is not in session. For example, recess around Easter and time in August, like right now, are good times to ask. When Congress is not in session, members of Congress are back in their district interacting with constituents like the people who live in your buildings. Before you contact the Congressional office, have a good outline as to what you want the visit to look like. For example, what will the member of Congress see when they come for a visit? Will they see the gym? Will they see a common space, a library, a sample apartment? Have a good idea as to what you want that to be. Also, have a good sense as to who's going to be on the tour. Is it going to be who from staff? Do you want a member of the board leading the tour? Assuming your building has a residents association, or even if they don't, do you want a resident on the tour? You really want to have a good sense of that before you extend the invitation. Who's going to be the point person on the tour? Who's going to say, on the left we see this, and on the right we see this? Really have a good sense of that. And do you want to do a Q&A with the residents? I think that Janel would agree, a Q&A is a great way and probably the best form of advocacy. It allows, I think, the residents to really feel empowered because they're asking questions directly to their member of Congress. But what topics will you want addressed during the Q&A? It's always a good idea to set expectations for the member of Congress as to what issues they'll be expected to address. At B'nai B'rith Congressional Visits, we like to focus on the issues that impact seniors, like HUD affordable housing, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and nutrition. Next slide.
And I want to just throw this out there that we know, we all have some residents that maybe will bring up some interesting issues, or you may have a resident that is maybe unfortunately being moved out of the building and may be upset about it. And with a lot of our visits, we have dealt with those issues. Mm-hmm. Certainly if something post-COVID is put together, if you have something like that, bring it to Evan. We've actually usually talked to the congressperson staffers ahead of time.
They're pros.
They know and understand.
They know exactly how to deal with it. They are as pros can be.
Yeah. So again, whenever you're looking at that these are things that we've dealt with. So it's always worked out.
Yep. So as Janel just touched on, I think our very first visit from a member of Congress where Janel and I worked on it together was Congressman Jamie Raskin from, Homecrest House just outside of Washington, D.C.
And we learned a lot, didn't we?
Yeah, very much so. Since 2007, B'nai B'rith has done a major push to invite members of Congress to our sponsored buildings. Our visit, as we talked about, Janelle and I thought that the Congressman Raskin visit was a very successful visit, but we certainly learned a few things along the way to improve for future visits. For example, after the tour of the building, Congressman Raskin spoke with the residents. It was an open forum where the residents could ask him questions. We found that during the discussion, questions often were asked about issues that really were not distinct to older Americans. For example, questions were about, polarizing political figures here in Washington, D.C.
Remember, this was right after the last presidential election, and I wish we had kind of been a little more proactive, but we learned from it. It was not a disaster, whereas it could have, if it had been a different congressperson.
Yep. In future congressional visits, we have worked with building staff and we've worked with the residents to submit questions ahead of time. This way, we're able to ensure that discussions with the members of Congress are about issues important to older adults. The people who live in your building can still ask the questions. We don't want to take the microphone away from anybody. We just want to have a sense that we're all on the same page about the topics that are going to be addressed. So if people can submit their questions ahead of time, then a member of the building staff can, pass, the microphone to each person and have a sense as to just what the order of the questions will be ahead of time. This way, we're keeping it focused about the, issues important to the people who live in your building. And in fairness to the member of Congress, they should have a rough idea as to what topics were going to be addressed. So that's certainly, a little brief snapshot of, the lessons that we learned. Next slide.
Plus, it's more relevant at that point to what you're trying to accomplish, which is, again, as Evan said, issues affecting older adults, specifically in Section 202 housing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, no matter what, you want to keep it respectful. And I will say at that visit with Congressman Raskin, we did have a couple of residents that got pretty upset about what was going on. And I have to admit, it really took away from it. And then it did luckily Congressman Raskin was able to bring it back, but it really did become a little testy for a few residents. And you do not want that. And you want the congressperson to have a really positive view of what this housing is and the programs that help your residents. We don't want to sugarcoat it, but we want them to feel good about that and that this is a program and all the programs that your residents use to stay living independently on the federal level are worth it.
Yep. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed the way we interact with other people, and advocacy efforts are certainly no exception. Unfortunately, in-person congressional meetings and visits to the building are not possible during the pandemic. Though phone calls, letter writing, and meetings over the phone are certainly viable options, as we've just discussed. However, phone calls to your congressional representative's office to register your comments during the course of a meeting, obviously phone calls right now during the course of the pandemic are probably a little bit more effective. Sorry about that. Due to the virus, many congressional offices are not being staffed at the same levels as they were pre-pandemic. So many people nowadays are working from home, and B'nai B'rith is certainly no exception. Also, there are probably less staff members working in an office and therefore reading the mail. Plus, mail, even before the virus, can take a little bit longer to get read. So considering that phone calls are more of an immediate way for constituents to make their voices heard, especially during a pandemic when legislation can move quickly, we think that's probably a better way to advocate right now than sending a letter.
So Evan and I'm going to talk about the benefits, but before I do that, I wanted to talk real quick. Evan and I have been discussing, because for a while what we were doing when we were going to meetings on Capitol Hill with your congressional staffers, we were actually taking some of those videos that we've gotten, whether it was some that we took from the leadership retreat or a few that have been made since then by your residents, talking about what Section 202 means to them and living in the building and the supports that they get. And it really is, for a lot of the offices, it was a very powerful visual. Again, as the residents being the best ones to advocate for why this is such an important program and we need to expand it, certainly continue it, but expand it. So Evan and I thought that coming up, we're going to take advantage also of Zoom, and we're going to try to figure out if we can show videos, although clearly right now we don't have that capability. But in some of these congressional visits, if we can actually kind of bring some more of the residents to these meetings, in that we would have some of their pre-recorded video of them, or even including potentially, if we can, somebody live. And it could even be a staffer too, talking a little bit about the issues they've had with COVID-19 and things like that. But you probably will be hearing from us. We may have talk about this on some more calls of how we can bring a full picture, because it also, we meet with the same staffers, and we need, I don't want to say we need additional content, but we want to reinforce this. And we think that sometimes having the people that are there in the buildings and taking advantage, that we can maybe do some Zoom type of calls with going forward, that we might be talking to some of you all about doing that. So just FYI, taking advantage of the fact that we might be able to bring some of you to a meeting without you ever leaving your office or your home. Anything you want to add to that, Evan?
No, I think you touched on it. Great.
Okay, so again, some things that we've been talking about all along. The benefits of these working relationships with your congressional offices during COVID-19 and beyond. And we've seen this even during hurricanes, any kind of emergencies that happened. Having a good relationship prior to that with your congressional offices, with your local and state, can help so they know who you are during times of emergency. So the congressional offices can provide you with local health departments' contact information to get your questions answered. A lot of times they can actually get a name and a phone number for you. Congressional offices may have contacts in the community which can assist with obtaining personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, and food. And we've seen that in a lot of our buildings. That was especially key during the height of the pandemic in New York, when it was really difficult to get anything. Congressional offices, again, can help your residents with agency work like the Social Security Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, and Department of Health and Human Services. And certainly we've seen a lot of that. Those of you that came to our conference we held in Philadelphia, we actually had the two senators from Pennsylvania each sent a representative from their office, the staffers that actually do work with constituents on those issues, to come and talk about how they do that. And I think we've even had some that have come to the buildings and actually set up, some workshops to find out who needed help and to set that in motion. So this is an ongoing thing, but in times of crisis like this, it's especially relevant to have those relationships. And again, Evan and I are always here to help. If you don't have those, we have he more so than I, he's the one that kind of keeps more in touch with those congressional staffers. I do participate in the meetings, but he's more the one that keeps in touch with them, can always help you.
Yep, absolutely.
So, and we talked about what will advocacy look like post-COVID-19. Again, you're not going to have those face-to-face meetings until the pandemic is over. However, as I just said, we're looking to bring some of you all into our Zoom calls with them because we really think that that's important, getting some of them, someone working the front line. So we think that that is a benefit, and we may be able to do some of that post-COVID-19 as well. We'll see how that plays out. I have a feeling it's going to be a while before everybody transitions back to, the way things were before. So we may still have some of these tools available to us occasionally in our post-COVID-19 world. Evan, you want to talk about how you feel about what's going to happen with visits to the buildings?
Yeah, I think once there's once COVID-19 is no longer around, I fully expect the visits to be, up and running again. We're going to do a lot of extended outreach to buildings, in particular, buildings that have either have never had a visit, or buildings that we know are getting a new member of Congress. We already have a sense as to which one of our buildings are going to have a new member of Congress. So we'll see when there's a vaccine and see when it's appropriate for us to start reaching back out to the offices for those types of visits.
And again, phone calls are always going to be the most effective way to advocate for a time-sensitive issue. Evan likes to say that, those handwritten letters, they do have impact, especially if there's a lot of them coming on the same issues. But phone calls really are, and I understand sometimes that's just not practical and the letter writing is easier. But certainly for time sensitive, phone calls are going to be the best. And clearly COVID-19, phone calls are the absolute best.
Yep, absolutely. I could not agree with that.
Evan, what do you think about emails and some of those things where they generate, an email on a call?
So sure, emails are a great way to contact your member's office. All you have to do is go to your member of Congress's website, and there should be a tab called Contact Me. Under that Contact Me tab, there'll be like a web form where you fill out your name, where you live, your email address, and certainly sending them an email similar to what would be in a letter is another really good way to communicate with your elected representatives.
What about personalizing it? Is that
personalizing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So in the email boxes, there should be a box where you'll be, there'll be like a drop down that might say, what's the topic they want you to fill out? But there should be a box. Obviously each member's website's a little bit different how they want to construct it, but each member should have a box that will allow you to write a note with your own personal message inside.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so our conclusions are, again, don't wait for a crisis. Be proactive and advocate on senior issues. Again, there's a lot of tools: calling, writing a letter. That would include emailing as well. Inviting lawmakers and their staff to your building when we can do those again. Develop and maintain working relationships with congressional offices. And again, even if the congressperson isn't the one that comes, a staffer, still give them the tour. Make sure they see the building. They can also talk to the residents. They're not it'll be a little bit of a different visit as far as Q&A, Evan, right?
Yeah, I don't think the staffer is going to be able to speak as substantively for the member of Congress as the member of Congress would be able to speak for themselves, but they can certainly jot down some notes. They can certainly take your concerns, and they will obviously relay those concerns to the member of Congress. Also, though, for any constituent casework, they can certainly jot down that information and try to be as helpful as possible.
Right, and when that staffer comes and has that really positive visit and sees how great this program is, hopefully that would be impetus to get the congressperson there for the next visit.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, do we have any questions?
So Evan, you know, we were set in March
Yeah,
with the congressperson.
you know, obviously, our sponsored building in Delaware and Claymont, we were very excited to have the congresswoman who represents the building. It was right when COVID-19 was really starting to get everybody to start, rethink how they're going to go about their day-to-day, activities. Obviously, an abundance of caution, thank God, we decided to postpone it. I'm not sure we ever thought at the time that we'd be sitting here in August, really in the same place we're kind of been in March to a certain extent. And obviously, the minute that it's appropriate to invite the member of Congress back to your building, we're definitely going to extend that invitation.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
Evan
And it does work. It does work. All the letters and the phone calls, we did all
Thank
of
you.
that. So it works.
Yeah, Evan and I had to cancel. We had
Yeah.
train reservations and
Yeah,
hotel.
we were very excited for that
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah, the residents were too. Everyone was.
And I was
You're,
gonna go meet with the hotel for our Philadelphia conference.
yeah. It was very disappointing, but the minute it's appropriate to extend another invitation, we're certainly going to do that.
Okay, great.
And for all your buildings.
Absolutely. Especially buildings who have a new member of Congress.
Yeah, which could be happening with the.
Well, we did keep all the copies of the letters, so if we need to resubmit the letters, we can do that.
Okay.
Wonderful. And thank you for doing all that too. I mean, it works, right? It does.
Yes, it did work. It did work.